The sky was a deep violet as I stepped out of the elevator onto the rooftop, heels clicking against smooth concrete, the faint hum of jazz and laughter spilling out toward me like some carefully orchestrated dream. Glasses clinked. Waiters in black weaved through clusters of people, holding trays of hors d'oeuvres I couldn't pronounce. I'd spent the better part of an hour getting ready, sleek black dress, soft curls, the diamond earrings Nathan had given me on our 10th anniversary. For a moment, just one, I felt like I belonged in this glittering world. Nathan stood near the bar, his laughter rich, polished, the kind that drew attention. He wore confidence like a second skin, his tailored navy suit hugging him in all the right places. His presence always had a gravitational pull, and people around him, clients, investors, socialites, seemed caught in his orbit. I was used to this. I'd spent years standing beside him, smiling at the right times, offering polite commentary when addressed. Tonight, I told myself, would be no different. Another party, another performance. But then I saw her. Brielle Carter. 20-something, legs for days, blonde waves cascading over a low-back silver dress that sparkled like liquid mercury under the string lights. She was dancing with Nathan, no, not dancing. Clinging. Her hand was splayed across his chest, her head tilted just so as if she were whispering secrets meant for no one else. His hand was low on her back. Too low. They moved in slow, fluid rhythm, far too close for any line between professional and personal to remain intact. My breath caught. My legs, suddenly unsteady, carried me closer before my brain could form a plan. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to cry. But I had to know, had to see up close if what I feared was true. Nathan saw me approaching. He didn't flinch. Didn't move away from her. If anything, he pulled her in tighter, almost defiantly, before stepping back with that practiced grin I used to find charming. "Leah," he said smoothly, as if I were interrupting a perfectly ordinary conversation. "Didn't expect you to come find us so quickly." "Us." Brielle smiled at me tight, smug, like I was the one intruding. I forced a smile, brittle at the edges. "I was looking for my husband." Nathan raised his glass lazily and took a sip. "You found me." I waited. For an explanation. For shame. For even a flicker of the man I married. Instead, he tilted his head, studied me like I was a stranger, then said flatly, "You have two options, sit and watch or leave." Just like that. My mouth went dry. The world blurred around the edges, people chatting, laughing, oblivious to the moment my marriage cracked open under my feet. I looked at him, really looked, and I saw it. No remorse. No hesitation. Just a wall. A challenge. Something in me snapped quietly, cleanly. I didn't argue. Didn't ask for answers he clearly had no intention of giving. My fingers tightened around my clutch, and I nodded once, more to myself than to him. "Then I'll leave." I turned and walked away, the sound of my own heartbeat thudding in my ears louder than the music. No one stopped me. Not even Nathan. Especially not him. I hit the elevator button with a shaking hand. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and faced the mirrored wall, catching my reflection. My eyes wide with disbelief. My lips trembling. The diamond earrings sparkled mockingly. I pulled them off and dropped them into my clutch like they were burning me. As the elevator descended, so did the weight of everything I'd just seen. Heard. Felt. The betrayal didn't scream. It whispered, low and cruel, wrapping around my throat until I couldn't breathe. Outside, the air was sharp with winter, cutting through my thin coat like glass. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stand still. The city blurred past me, storefronts, passing cars, the occasional group of partygoers laughing under the neon glow. My heels clicked against the pavement, faster, more erratic, as if I could outrun what I'd seen. I stopped at the edge of a crosswalk, gripping the pole for balance, my chest tight. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to dissolve. This couldn't be real. But it was. Nathan had looked me in the eyes and told me to leave, to watch, like I was nothing. Like the years we'd built together. Every sacrifice, every holiday party where I smiled through exhaustion, Every night I waited up for him, meant nothing. I dug into my clutch and pulled out my phone, the screen blurry from tears I hadn't realized were falling. My thumb hovered over his name. Then I scrolled down and tapped the only person I trusted in that moment. Jada, I choked out when she answered. I need a place to stay. There was no hesitation. Come over. Right now. And just like that, with nothing but my pride and a freezing breeze for company, I started walking again, this time, not toward Nathan or what we'd been, but into the unknown. Into myself. The sound of my heels tapping against the slick sidewalks of Seattle echoed louder than the thoughts tumbling through my head. It was late, too late for someone in a dress like mine to be walking alone in this part of downtown. But I didn't care. I didn't even feel the cold, though I knew it was there, biting at my legs, seeping through the thin material of my coat. I felt numb in a way I hadn't expected, not explosive rage, not sobs, but something dull and heavy, a weight pressing into my ribs and spine, settling into the hollows of my chest. I kept walking. Past office buildings where lights still flickered on, past quiet cafes locked up for the night, past the blurred faces of couples wrapped around each other in the warmth I'd once thought I had. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving, as if motion itself would stop me from unraveling completely. When I finally stopped, it was because my toes had gone so numb I couldn't feel them anymore, and the ache in my calves from walking in heels had reached a burning crescendo. I stood at a corner, leaning against a lamppost, shivering now that the adrenaline had begun to ebb. My fingers, stiff with cold, reached into my clutch for my phone. I didn't even bother looking at the screen. I just pressed the contact that had always answered. Jada, I said, voice low, shaking. Leah? What's wrong? I tried to speak, but nothing came out. Just a little broken breath. Where are you? Stay there. I'm coming to get you. I don't even know, I admitted, glancing around, trying to find a street sign. Somewhere near 5th. I left the party. Did he do something? She asked, her voice already shifting into that fierce, protective tone I'd known since college. He danced with her, Jada. That assistant. And when I confronted him, he said I could watch or leave. Dead silence on the line. Then, that son of a stay there. I'll send you a rideshare. Come here. We'll talk. By the time I got to Jada's, the shock had worn off just enough to let the tears come. I collapsed onto her couch, my makeup smudged and my breath hitching in that embarrassing, gasping way that made me feel like I was 17 again, crying over some high school crush. Only this wasn't some temporary heartbreak. This was a marriage. My marriage. 19 years of history, of holidays and arguments and private jokes. Of building a life together. She brought me tea and wrapped me in a soft blanket. We sat there, the city lights blinking outside her windows, my heels abandoned by the door, my pride in pieces. I didn't know what I was waiting for, some miracle text from Nathan, some explanation that would make it all make sense. But my phone stayed silent. I hate that he did this to you, Jada said, sitting beside me, legs tucked under her. But Leah, be honest. This wasn't the first time he made you feel like you didn't matter. I looked at her, startled. What do you mean? I mean, you've been fading for a while now. You don't laugh like you used to. You stopped painting. When's the last time you talked about anything you wanted that didn't involve making his life easier? The truth of her words cracked something open in me. She was right. There had been signs. Little ones I ignored because that's what you do when you love someone. Or think you do. The missed anniversaries chalked up to work. The way he'd scroll through his phone while I spoke. The constant minimizing, how everything that bothered me was me, overthinking, reading too much into it, or my personal favorite, being too sensitive. I'd told myself that's just what long marriages became. That after nearly 2 decades, love looked different. But this betrayal wasn't some slow erosion. It was a spotlight. It forced me to see the rot I'd been pretending wasn't there. I stayed up late into the night talking with Jada, letting her words wash over me like waves. She didn't coddle me. She didn't say Nathan was worth saving. She just reminded me who I was before I became someone who apologized for existing too loudly. You're Leah Morgan, she said, pointing at me like she was delivering a battle cry. You used to make entire rooms pause when you walked in. You had ideas. A voice. You were fire. And I had let someone turn me into smoke. That night, as I lay in Jada's guest room, tucked beneath the soft quilt she said her mom made years ago, I stared at the ceiling and began to remember pieces of myself. Not the version that Nathan praised when it was convenient, or tolerated when I got too emotional, but the version that used to take up space and not apologize for it. The version I hadn't seen in years. I knew now that what happened on that rooftop wasn't an isolated moment. It wasn't about a dance or a girl in a silver dress. It was about years of feeling small, being silenced, laughed off. It was about the fact that when I stood there, looking at him, and asked for respect, he told me to leave. And this time, I finally did. Morning light filtered through the gauzy curtains in Jada's guest room, casting soft streaks of gold across the hardwood floors. I lay still for a while, staring at the ceiling, letting the silence settle over me like a bomb. For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't wake up to the sound of Nathan's alarm or the distant hum of him taking early conference calls. There was no scent of his cologne lingering in the air. Just me. And the quiet. I got up slowly, the ache in my feet from the night before still pulsing as I padded toward the kitchen. Jada was already there, robe tied at the waist, scrolling through her phone with one hand and sipping coffee with the other. She looked up when she saw me and smiled gently, pushing a mug across the counter. Didn't know how you take it, so I went with cream and a dash of cinnamon, she said. You always liked a little sweetness with your bitterness. I gave her a tired smile. Thanks. We stood in silence for a few minutes, sipping, the unspoken tension curling between us. Finally, Jada set her mug down and leaned forward, her expression cautious but deliberate. I didn't want to pile on last night, but I think there's more going on with Nathan and Brielle than what you saw. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? She hesitated, then said, I've heard things. From clients. People in that circle. Brielle's, known, Leah. This isn't the first time she's gotten a little too close to a higher-up. I bristled. Rumors? No. Patterns. She worked at Everwell before Nathan's company. Same story, charming, ambitious, always with the executives. She left suddenly after someone's wife found texts. I stared at her, the words sinking slowly into place. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself this was just a coincidence. But I couldn't. Not after the rooftop. Not after the way Nathan looked at her, like she was his world, and I was just some extra weight dragging him down. My hand trembled slightly as I picked at the edge of my mug. So this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment? Jada's face softened. I don't think it was ever about one moment. I think it's been building. And maybe you saw it before, but you didn't want to believe it. I nodded slowly. She wasn't wrong. It wasn't just the dance. It was the late-night meetings he brushed off as urgent. The way he suddenly changed his phone passcode without mentioning it. The guarded look he'd get whenever I walked into the room and Brielle was on speaker. The dismissive tone whenever I asked if everything was okay. I had been connecting the dots in the back of my mind for months, but I'd refused to draw the full picture. Because the truth was, I didn't want to know. Not really. Because knowing meant facing it. And facing it meant I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. That afternoon, I packed a small overnight bag and booked a short-term Airbnb in Capitol Hill. It was a modest studio, bare walls, clean lines, minimalist decor, but it had a quiet energy that felt safe. I stood in the middle of the space, holding the bag in one hand and the key in the other, and breathed in slowly. This was mine, even if it was temporary. Even if it didn't come with answers yet. I unpacked slowly, placing my essentials into drawers like I was staking a claim. I didn't bring much, just enough to get by. I didn't know how long I'd be here. I just knew I needed space. Space from Nathan, space from the noise of our curated life, space to hear myself think. That evening, I pulled out a journal I hadn't touched in years. It had a soft leather cover and thick, blank pages. I'd bought it on a whim on a weekend trip to Portland, telling myself I'd fill it with poetry and sketches. It had sat untouched on a shelf ever since. Now, I opened to the first page and let the pen move without thinking. I don't know when I disappeared, I wrote. But I want to find her again. The version of me that didn't apologize for needing things. For being loud, creative, emotional. I used to know her. I used to be her. The words flowed, clumsy at first, then freer. I wrote about the first time Nathan made me feel small, how I'd spent weeks planning his birthday party, only for him to show up late and drunk, then tease me in front of his friends for overdoing it. I wrote about how he'd complimented Brielle's fresh perspective in meetings while calling my ideas too emotional. I wrote about how I'd stopped painting after he joked that my canvases made the living room look cluttered. By the time I set the pen down, my hand ached. But something else inside me had loosened. Like a tight knot finally starting to come undone. I sat by the window as the city darkened, watching headlights blur through rain-slick streets. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just watched. And I realized I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of being unseen. And now that I'd stepped away, I wasn't going back to invisibility. The phone rang mid-morning, just as I was tying my sneakers for a walk. For a moment, I stared at the screen, Nathan's name glowing like a wound I hadn't let scab over yet. I let it ring, watched the call go to voicemail. But then it rang again, persistent, like he was pulling on a string I hadn't quite cut yet. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Leah," he said, his voice carefully controlled. Too calm, too composed. I didn't speak. I wanted to hear what he'd lead with. An apology? A confession? Silence stretched. About the other night, he finally began, "You're blowing it out of proportion." That was it. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Let's talk." Just a quick dismissal, like I'd made a scheduling error and not walked away from our marriage after watching him melt into another woman's arms. "I'm blowing it out of proportion," I repeated slowly, as if tasting the words would make them make sense. He sighed like he was already tired of the conversation. "It was just a dance, Leah. People were drinking, having fun. That's what these events are. You know that." I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. "Nathan, it wasn't a dance. It was the way you touched her. The way you looked at me like I didn't belong. Like I was some bitter stranger in your world." "She works for me," he said, his tone clipped now, defensive. "She's young. She flirts. It's harmless." "You know I'm not interested in that." "Do I?" I shot back, sharper than I meant to, but not sharp enough. Because from where I stood, it didn't look harmless. It looked deliberate. "You didn't just let it happen, you enjoyed it." He laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh, but a strained, dismissive one. "God, you're being dramatic." There it was. The word. Dramatic. He wielded it like a scalpel, slicing away at my feelings until they seemed excessive, untrustworthy. I used to second-guess myself every time he said it. I used to wonder if I really was too sensitive, too reactive. But something had shifted. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being honest. And you just don't like how that feels." Another pause. I could practically hear him pacing, or running a hand through his hair the way he did when he was trying to stay in control. "I don't get why you're so upset," he finally muttered. "It's not like I cheated." "Not physically, maybe," I replied, feeling my throat tighten, but emotionally. "Nathan, I've been standing next to you, loving you, supporting you for years, and you've been slowly phasing me out." That rooftop moment wasn't the beginning. It was the final straw. He scoffed again, this time quieter. "I don't know what you want from me." I inhaled deeply, feeling a surprising calm wash over me. "I don't want anything. Not now. I just needed to hear it from you. Needed to know if there was even a shred of accountability in you. And now I do." He started to speak, but I hung up. The silence afterward was loud, pressing, but not unbearable. In fact, it felt like the air had cleared. I stood still in the middle of the room, waiting to feel something sharp, regret, guilt, longing. But all I felt was certainty. That call had given me more clarity than weeks of doubt ever had. Nathan's reaction said more than any heartfelt apology ever could have. He didn't take responsibility. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't even seem curious about why I left. He was too busy preserving his version of the truth, that he had done nothing wrong, and that I was the one making a scene. That afternoon, I turned off my phone. No more waiting. No more hoping. I lit a candle, brewed some tea, and sat cross-legged on the floor of the studio apartment, journal open in my lap. I wrote everything I hadn't said on the phone. "You gaslit me for years," I scrawled across the page. "You made me question my own instincts. You treated my emotional needs like inconveniences. You didn't just flirt with someone else, you abandoned me in front of a crowd and then blamed me for reacting." As the words spilled out, I realized something else. I hadn't been waiting for him to fix this. Not really. I'd been waiting for me to see it clearly enough that I could walk away without flinching. And I was finally there. The next few days passed quietly. I kept myself moving walks through the city, reading old novels I hadn't touched in years, eating takeout straight from the box without needing to plate it like I used to for Nathan. I stopped answering his texts when they came. First a simple, "Can we talk?" Then, "I miss you." Then, when I didn't respond, "This is childish." I didn't need to reply. My silence was its own message now. What he called childish, I called peace. What he called dramatic, I called truth. And for the first time in years, I was starting to believe myself. Mornings became my sanctuary. There was something grounding about lacing up my running shoes just as the sun began to pierce through the gray Seattle haze. The streets were quieter at that hour, the city still yawning into wakefulness, and I liked the way the cool air kissed my cheeks as I ran past brick buildings and sleepy storefronts. My breath came in rhythmic bursts, and with each stride, I felt a little more anchored. A little more mine. Running became ritual. Not for fitness, not to impress anyone, but because it reminded me I could move forward, literally and emotionally. I would pass couples walking dogs, early risers sipping coffee on their porches, and I didn't envy them anymore. I had my own pace now. I was rebuilding something I hadn't realized I'd lost. Presence. Not just being alive, but actually living. The Airbnb felt small at first, but over time, I began to fill it not with things, but with pieces of myself. I started cooking again. Not for Nathan, not for some dinner party or date night, but for me. I made roasted vegetables and fresh pasta, tried new spices, left dishes in the sink overnight just because I could. It was messy, imperfect, and mine. I even bought fresh flowers from the market down the street. Yellow tulips. They didn't match anything in the apartment, but they made the space feel softer, warmer. I found a quiet corner in the apartment and turned it into a writing nook, just a small desk I picked up from a secondhand shop and my journal. I wrote every night. Sometimes pages, sometimes just a line. I didn't worry about structure or grammar. I just told the truth. I forgot I liked eating dinner by candlelight, I wrote one night. I forgot I liked the sound of my own thoughts. Therapy, too, became part of my rhythm. Dr. Geller had a soft voice and sharp eyes, the kind of therapist who didn't let you hide behind politeness. During one of our early sessions, she asked me, "When was the last time you felt seen in your marriage?" I opened my mouth to answer, and couldn't. That silence said more than words ever could. We talked about the slow erosion of self that happens when you shrink over time for someone else. How I'd stopped asserting needs because it was easier to avoid the tension. How I'd convinced myself that needing less was a virtue. That love meant compromise, even if I was the only one compromising. But in the quiet space of that studio, I began to untangle the knots. It wasn't easy. There were nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Wondering if it would have been easier to stay and keep pretending. But then I'd remember the rooftop. His smirk. His words. "You have two options, sit and watch or leave." And I'd remember that I chose the door. That choice wasn't about him. It was about me. About reclaiming the version of myself I'd buried beneath years of apology and accommodation. I wasn't running from Nathan anymore. I was running toward myself. One Sunday, I wandered into an art supply store on a whim. The smell of paint and wood and possibility wrapped around me like a hug I didn't know I needed. I bought a set of watercolors and a blank canvas. That night, I sat on the floor, dipped my brush into blue, and let my hand move without thinking. The painting wasn't perfect, messy, abstract, emotional, but it was mine. I hung it in the entryway. When Jada came to visit, she stopped, tilted her head, and smiled. "You're coming back to life." "I think I am," I said. She stayed for dinner. We ate pasta and drank cheap red wine, laughing so hard at one point I nearly cried. When she left, she hugged me tight and whispered, "You don't need him to feel whole." "You never did." After she left, I curled up on the couch with my journal and wrote, "Lonely isn't the same as being alone. This space is quiet, but it's not empty. It's filled with me." The loneliness came in waves, sure. But it wasn't the ache of missing him, it was the ache of unlearning dependency, of separating my identity from a shared past. It was a good kind of pain. The kind that came with healing. Each day, I grew a little steadier. I spoke more clearly. I stood a little taller. My reflections stopped surprising me. I wasn't who I used to be. But I liked the woman staring back. She was present. She was rebuilding. She was mine. It started with a single news alert, a tiny red banner at the top of my phone that I almost ignored. I was sitting in a corner cafe, halfway through a croissant and journaling about the way the rain sounded against the windows when my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting a promo or calendar reminder, but instead I saw the headline, "Rhodes and Rise Wellness Assistant Under Investigation by HR." I didn't click it immediately. I just stared at the words. My breath caught halfway through my chest, frozen between disbelief and something close to validation. Brielle. The name wasn't in the headline, but I knew. Of course I knew. My fingers hovered over the screen and finally I tapped it. The article was vague, HR investigations usually were. But the details were telling. A young executive assistant had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review following multiple complaints of inappropriate behavior and breaches of professional conduct. Several anonymous employees had come forward describing a pattern of personal entanglements with leadership and unfair advantages in promotions and visibility. They didn't say her name. But they didn't need to. It was Brielle. And Nathan, he was mentioned too. Not accused, not directly, but his name floated in the subtext, couched behind sources close to upper management. His picture even accompanied the article, him in his signature navy suit, eyes focused somewhere off camera, as if he were already looking beyond the mess. I set my phone down and stared at the coffee in front of me, the swirl of cream still spiraling slowly at the surface. My stomach twisted. Not from surprise, no. I think some part of me had been waiting for this. But there was something else in the mix now. Quiet, simmering vindication. I had spent months drinking under the weight of doubt, guilt, and gaslighting. I had walked away from my marriage with everyone assuming I was just another woman scorned by her husband's midlife distraction. I had second-guessed myself in the darkest corners of the night, wondering if maybe I had overreacted. But now? Now the cracks were showing, and not just to me. I refreshed the article, watched as comments flooded in. Some people defended her, of course. Others criticized the company. But what struck me most were the people who finally said what I had whispered to myself in that tiny Airbnb over and over. This wasn't just a workplace flirtation. This was a calculated pattern. A misuse of trust. A dynamic where women like Brielle rose not on merit, but on manipulation, and where men like Nathan allowed it to happen because it fed their egos. Later that afternoon, Jada sent me a screenshot of a company-wide memo that had been leaked online. It confirmed that Brielle had been temporarily removed from her position and that an outside firm had been brought in to conduct interviews. Nathan's name appeared again, couched in vague, executive cooperation language, but it was clear. The spotlight was shifting, and he could no longer deflect it with charm and designer suits. I couldn't help but think about the empire Nathan had built. He loved that company more than anything. More than me, I sometimes thought. Rhodes and Rise wasn't just a job to him, it was his identity. He branded it as a luxury wellness empire, full of mindfulness and integrity. He stood on stages giving speeches about balance, about emotional wellness, about authenticity. What a joke. Now, all those curated ideals were being peeled away, layer by layer. And as I watched from a distance, I felt something strange settle in my chest. Not joy, not revenge. Just clarity. This was what happened when you built your castle out of mirrors. Eventually, one breaks, and suddenly, the whole thing shatters. I didn't call him. I didn't need to. For once, Nathan had to sit in the silence. He had to face the consequences of the choices he made, without me there to soften the edges or smooth things over behind the scenes. In the days that followed, more stories emerged. Not just about Brielle, but about the culture Nathan had allowed to grow. Whispers of favoritism. Of whispered secrets exchanged at after-hours events. Of women passed over, dismissed, minimized. I read every word, not because I wanted to see him fall, but because I wanted to witness the truth stepping out into the light. One evening, I sat at my little desk and opened my journal. I'm not celebrating his downfall, I wrote. But I'm relieved that the mask is slipping. For years, I thought I was the problem. Too needy. Too insecure. Too dramatic. But the problem was never my voice, it was that he refused to listen. I closed the journal and lit a candle. The scent of lavender filled the room, grounding me in the small, quiet world I had rebuilt. Nathan's world was crumbling. And for the first time, I wasn't tangled in the debris. I wasn't his fixer anymore. I wasn't his buffer. I wasn't the afterthought. I was free. And in the silence that followed, I realized how loud my peace had become. It was just after 4 on a gray Thursday when I saw him through the glass doors of my office building. Nathan. Standing there like a misplaced memory, his coat damp from the misting rain, eyes searching the lobby until they landed on me. My stomach tightened, not with longing, not even with fear, but with caution. It had been weeks since I last heard his voice. The last message he sent had been a weak attempt at reconciliation, something about missing what we had, followed by silence when I didn't respond. And now he was here, in person. I thought about pretending I didn't see him. Turning back toward the elevator, slipping into the safety of the upper floors, pretending this encounter hadn't materialized. But I didn't move. I stood tall, gathered my things with calm precision, and walked toward the lobby. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but emotionally. Deflated. His suit, usually crisp and commanding, hung looser, like he'd been too tired to tailor his presence that day. There was no smirk, no charming smile. Just Nathan, raw and hesitant, like a man who'd finally seen the cracks in his mirror. "Leah," he said as I stepped through the glass. I didn't say anything, just watched him carefully. "Can we talk?" His voice was lower than usual, stripped of its practiced polish. "Please." I led him outside, not wanting a scene in the lobby. We stood under the narrow awning, city noises humming softly around us. The air smelled like wet concrete and something else, uncertainty, maybe. "I wasn't sure you'd even come down," he admitted, eyes flicking to mine then away. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I needed to say some things to you. Face to face." I nodded once. "Then say them." He looked like he was searching for a script he didn't have. "I messed up," he began. "Not just the rooftop, though that was unforgivable. But before that, for a long time, I said nothing. Let him sit in it. I made you invisible," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to. I don't think I even saw it happening until you left. But when you did, when you really didn't come back, I realized how much space you took up in my life. Good space. Quiet, essential space I didn't appreciate. Still, I didn't speak. I wasn't here to rescue him from his guilt." He continued, voice cracking just slightly. "Brielle wasn't about love or passion or any of those things people assume. It was validation. Cheap, ego-boosting attention from someone who made me feel admired. It was pathetic, and I see that now. She didn't know me. Not really. Not like you did." The silence stretched between us like a thread that had long since snapped. "I let you disappear," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "Not just at that party. In our marriage. I stopped showing up. I stopped asking how you were. I stopped listening. And you kept giving. You kept trying. Until you couldn't anymore." His voice broke then, not dramatically, but just enough for me to see the wear in him. Not performance. Not spin. Just regret. I looked at him, This man I once built a life around, and realized how far I'd come. I wasn't standing here hoping he'd beg me to return. I wasn't wishing for the old Nathan. I was witnessing someone else's reckoning, and it wasn't mine to carry. I appreciate the apology, I said, my voice clear. Truly. But I'm not interested in sweeping anything under the rug. I'm not asking you to, he said quickly. I know I have a lot of work to do on myself, on how I've treated people. I've stepped back from the company. Temporarily. Maybe permanently. HR's doing their thing. And I'm in therapy. I raised my eyebrows, surprised. Dr. Elena Ruiz, he added. Apparently, she's the one everyone goes to when they've burned everything down and want to start digging through the ashes. I gave a short, breathy laugh despite myself. She's good. So I've heard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The traffic hummed by. A woman walked past us, holding a red umbrella, her dog trotting along behind her in a little raincoat. The city moved on, even as this moment held still. I'm not asking for us to go back, he said. I know that version of us doesn't exist anymore. But if there's even a small chance to rebuild something, not what we had, but something new, I'd like to try. I studied him. The man before me was not the polished CEO who once dismissed my pain as drama. He was weathered, raw, perhaps finally beginning to understand what it meant to be accountable. But even so, I knew one apology, no matter how sincere, wasn't enough. I need space, I said. Time. And honesty. If we ever even attempt to move forward, it'll be on new terms. On my terms. He nodded. I understand. I'll wait. I didn't offer a hug or a promise. Just a quiet nod before I turned and walked away. Not because I was angry, but because I was whole. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking away from him. I was walking toward myself. The waiting room smelled like lavender and lemon, subtle and calming, the kind of scent designed to make you forget your nerves. I sat on one end of the plush beige couch, my coat folded neatly in my lap, fingers tapping a rhythm against my knee. The walls were painted a soft, buttery cream, the kind that invited vulnerability without demanding it. A bookshelf in the corner held titles on grief, communication, forgiveness. I stared at the spine of emotionally focused couples therapy and tried not to laugh. Nathan sat at the far end of the couch. Not too close, not too distant. He was dressed more casually than I was used to seeing him, dark jeans, a navy sweater, and sneakers that looked too clean, like he'd bought them just for this session. He hadn't said much since we met outside the building. Just a quiet hello, his hands tucked deep into his pockets, eyes flicking up at me when he thought I wasn't looking. The door opened, and Dr. Elena Ruiz stepped into the room. She was composed, with a warm, grounded presence. No nonsense, but not cold. Her silver hair was pulled into a low bun, her black glasses perched at the tip of her nose. She gestured for us to follow her, and we did, like two students entering the principal's office. Her office was brighter than I expected. A large window let in natural light, softening the seriousness of the space. We took our seats, again, apart, and Dr. Ruiz settled into the chair across from us, a notebook in her lap, pen poised but not yet moving. I appreciate you both coming, she began, her voice low and even. This is not a place for blame or defense. It's a space for truth, for clarity, and if you're both willing, growth. I nodded. Nathan did, too. She looked at me first. Leah, would you like to begin? I took a breath. Held it. Let it go. I spent years being invisible in my marriage, I said, my voice calm but steady. I kept thinking if I was patient enough, supportive enough, forgiving enough, he'd finally see me again. But the truth is, Nathan stopped seeing me long before Brielle entered the picture. Nathan looked down at his hands. I stopped speaking up because it never changed anything. Every time I brought up how I felt, I was overreacting. Every hurt was misinterpreted. Eventually, I started to question whether my pain was even real. My throat tightened, but I kept going. Then came the rooftop. That night wasn't just about a dance. It was about a choice. You looked at me, Nathan, and told me I could either sit and watch or leave. That was the clearest moment of my entire marriage. You told me exactly where I stood. Silence settled in the room like a heavy blanket. Nathan's jaw flexed, but he didn't interrupt. Dr. Ruiz finally turned to him. Nathan, how would you like to respond? He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding the breath all along. She's right, he said, eyes still on his lap. I did dismiss her. I made her feel small. I think I convinced myself that as long as I was providing, as long as things looked good from the outside, it meant I was doing my job as a husband. He paused, finally looking up. But I wasn't really there. I was phoning it in. Letting Leah carry the emotional weight, the household, the connection. And when Brielle started giving me attention, I took it like a shortcut to feeling important again. He shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't about her. It was about me. My ego. My insecurity. I didn't even realize how much I relied on Leah to define my self-worth until she left. I watched him speak, waiting for the twist, for the usual deflection or passive excuse. But it didn't come. He wasn't blaming the wine, or the pressure of his job, or even me. He was owning it. And for the first time, I believed he meant it. Dr. Ruiz leaned forward. Nathan, what did you mean that night? When you gave her those two choices, sit and watch or leave. He shook his head slowly. I think I was angry that she showed up. I wanted that night to be about me, my image, my power. Seeing her reminded me of everything I was neglecting, and instead of facing that, I punished her for it. My chest ached. Not with sadness. With release. Dr. Ruiz turned to me again. Leah, what do you need if this relationship is to move forward in any form? I didn't hesitate. Space. Respect. Emotional honesty. I don't want the old version of us back. It wasn't working. If we build something again, it needs to be new. And it needs to be mutual. Nathan nodded slowly. I want that too. But I know wanting isn't enough. I have to show it. And I will. We didn't leave with a plan that day. No promises. No dramatic reconciliation. But we left with something more important, clarity. In the elevator down, we stood in silence, side by side. When the doors opened, Nathan turned to me and said quietly, "Thank you for giving me the chance to listen." I didn't say you're welcome. I just nodded and walked ahead. I wasn't giving him anything. I was giving myself the space to finally be heard. I hadn't been to Green Lake in years. Not since before everything started to shift, before the silent distance in our home turned into gaping silence in our hearts. Nathan and I used to walk here on lazy Sundays, coffee in hand, our rescue dog Baxter trotting happily beside us. The same bench always called to us, the one tucked under the wide cedar, just off the main path where the lake stretched out like glass, mirroring the gray Seattle skies. Today, I walked the trail alone. The gravel crunched beneath my sneakers, grounding me with each step. It was chilly, the kind of chill that slipped through jackets and settled into your bones, but I didn't mind. I pulled my scarf tighter around my neck and let the cold touch my cheeks, let the breeze carry away the weight that still clung to the edges of me. Baxter had passed 2 years ago. We never got another dog. Nathan had been too busy, and I had stopped asking for things by then. It was easier to accept silence than to push against it. That's how it starts, isn't it? The erosion. Not in loud arguments or sudden betrayals, but in all the things you stop asking for. All the pieces of yourself you tuck away just to keep the peace. I reached the bench and sat slowly, letting the wood press into the backs of my legs. The lake looked the same, still, vast, unmoved by the chaos of the world around it. It felt strange how this place had remained unchanged while everything inside me had shifted so completely. But maybe that's why I came. Maybe I needed one thing that hadn't rewritten itself. I pulled out my journal, the one that had become a lifeline in the quiet months of my separation. Pages filled with raw truths, tear stains, revelations I hadn't dared to speak aloud. I flipped to a blank page and let the pen move. He says he sees me now, but I need to see myself first. It came out so clearly. No hesitation. No uncertainty. I had spent so much of my life trying to be enough for someone else. To be palatable, pleasing, supportive without being demanding. I adjusted, adapted, dimmed my voice. I believed love meant compromise, but I forgot that compromise doesn't mean disappearing. Nathan was trying. I could see that now. The therapy sessions were honest. He wasn't deflecting anymore. He listened when I spoke. He didn't argue when I cried. He had even stepped away from his role at Rhodes and Rise, something I once believed he'd never do. His life had been built around control, and he was finally learning to loosen his grip. I respected the effort, but I couldn't base my decisions on his effort anymore. I had to base them on mine. It wasn't that I didn't care about him, I did. A part of me probably always would. But caring and choosing were different things. I could care and still choose myself. I could acknowledge growth and still decide not to go back. That was the thing no one told you about healing. It doesn't always come with a grand finale or a dramatic closure. Sometimes healing looks like sitting alone on a bench by a lake, writing down your own clarity in black ink. Sometimes it means walking away even after the apology, even after the change. Because the truth is, I didn't want what we used to be. I wanted something new. And not just with Nathan, if there was ever a future with him, but with myself. I wanted the kind of life where I didn't have to explain my worth to anyone, where I didn't have to trade parts of myself to keep a relationship afloat. I looked around at the familiar scene. The joggers, the distant hum of laughter from a nearby playground, the ducks drifting lazily near the shore. Life continued, indifferent and beautiful in its simplicity. And I was a part of it. I closed my journal and sat for a while longer, letting my thoughts settle into stillness. Not decision, just presence. I wasn't rushing toward an answer, wasn't mapping out a future. I was simply letting myself be here, fully. That was new for me. When I finally stood, my knee stiff from sitting too long, I felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but clearer. Steadier. Like I had come home to a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. I walked the path back toward the street slowly, watching my breath puff in soft clouds. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I didn't check it. Whether it was Nathan or a calendar reminder or some work email didn't matter. Nothing needed me in this moment more than I needed myself. As I reached the edge of the trail, I looked back at the bench once more. Not with longing, but with gratitude. That bench had held versions of me, hopeful, heartbroken, unsure. But today, it held a woman who had finally remembered how to choose herself. And that choice was enough. The late afternoon light slipped gently through the blinds of my apartment, casting long golden stripes across the hardwood floor. I sat at my small kitchen table, a half-empty mug of chai cooling beside me, journal open, pen poised. This ritual had become second nature, this stillness, this checking in with myself. But today felt different. Not because something dramatic had happened, but because of everything that hadn't. It had been nearly 6 months since that rooftop party. 6 months since Nathan handed me a choice wrapped in cruelty, and I chose myself instead. Since then, the world hadn't flipped upside down. It had, instead, shifted slowly, carefully, until it felt like it finally fit again. Nathan had officially stepped away from Rhodes and Rise. The headlines had moved on, the investigations quietly wrapped. Brielle had disappeared from the company's narrative, her name now a cautionary tale spoken in whispers. Nathan didn't give speeches anymore. He went to therapy. He read. He wrote. And most notably, he listened. We weren't back together. Not in the way people expected. I still lived in my own apartment, a warm, sunlit space filled with my colors, my rhythms, my energy. I still woke up alone, made breakfast for one, ran my morning routes around Green Lake without anyone waiting on the couch when I returned. And yet, Nathan and I met every week. Usually Sundays. No expectations. Just two people who had hurt each other, sitting down to learn how not to do that anymore. Our first few meetings were awkward. We sipped coffee like strangers, circled topics without touching them. But little by little, the walls came down. He talked about his guilt. I talked about my silence. We didn't try to fix the past. We let it rest, like a broken thing that no longer needed to be reassembled, just acknowledged for what it was. I flipped to a new page in my journal and began to write. I'm not going back to who I was. That woman, she needed permission, validation, approval. This version of me knows her own worth, even when it's quiet, even when no one's clapping. If we dance again, it'll be to music we write together. Not the old soundtrack. Something new. Something honest. I paused and let the pen rest against the page. It felt true. Nathan had invited me to a small dinner a few nights ago, not a company party, not a curated event. Just him, a couple of friends, and his sister visiting from out of town. I said yes, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to see if I could stand beside him without shrinking. And I did. I wore a dark green dress I loved, one that hugged my body in ways that used to make me self-conscious. I wore it for me. At the dinner, he introduced me simply. This is Leah, he said, voice steady. She's the reason I've changed. He didn't fawn or perform. He didn't try to hold my hand unless I offered it. But he watched me with reverence. Like he saw me clearly for the first time in years and didn't look away. That night, after everyone had gone home, we sat on the balcony of his apartment, legs tucked under us, sharing a bottle of wine. I used to think love meant merging into one thing, he said softly. Now I know it's about being two whole people, standing side by side. I had looked at him, the lines on his face deeper than before, his eyes softer, more open. And sometimes love means standing apart for a while, I said. So you can learn who you are without the other. He nodded. Are we still learning? I smiled. Every day. Now, sitting here in my apartment, with the hum of the heater and the faint sound of music from the cafe downstairs, I felt at peace. Not because everything was fixed. Not because love had magically solved all our issues. But because I had found my way back to myself, and that made all the difference. I glanced at the small stack of art supplies on the side table, canvases half finished, watercolor palettes smudged with soft blues and warm ochres. I had started painting again. Not for show. Not for praise. Just for the joy of it. The feeling of brush on canvas, the way the colors bled into one another like emotions with no hard edges. My phone buzzed. A message from Nathan. Made that lentil stew you taught me. It's edible. Barely. Wanna come be my taste tester? I smiled. I didn't respond right away. I closed my journal, stood, and walked to the window. The street below buzzed gently with life, people heading home, some beginning their nights, lights flickering on like quiet celebrations. I had a life here, one built on intention. And if Nathan was going to be part of it, it would be because he earned it, not because he asked for it, or because I couldn't say no. But because he grew, and I grew, and somewhere in the middle, something real began to bloom. I picked up my phone and typed back, be there in 30. Don't burn it. We weren't who we used to be. But maybe, just maybe, we could learn a new kind of dance. One that didn't ask me to disappear to make him shine. One where I moved with him, not around him. One where we both heard the music.